can train those shoulders. And of course my work, here, it's not so much, but it can be worse. And if yours is worse, there's no problem. That's why we are here at Teasing You Money to help you do away with it, have your wellness program on, and get your day started with good vibes. Yeah, that's why we wake up every day in the morning. And thank you for keeping me company. My name is Evelyn Owala of Eval Health and Fitness, and I'll be your host for today. So I'm so sure you've already picked the water bottles and you have your space all set. And if you're a team, just make sure when you're out there you keep social distance. So the first thing we're going to do is deadlifts. If you don't have the water bottles, don't worry, I got you. What you're going to do for the deadlifts is just that, and touch the ground, come back up. 1, touch the ground and come back up. 2. But if you have the water bottles or you have a pair of dumbbells, pick them up and let's get this started. We're going to do 15 repetitions times 4, but just before that we're going to do our warm-up. So our warm-up is going to be a jumping jacks and high knee. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3 and move. 1, we're doing 15. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We're going to do 15 times 3. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. All right. Walk around. Make sure you also just feel the cracks just from waking up, and probably your body is not exactly sure if it wants to do this. I can assure you, you need this, just like myself. Let's go. Time's up. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, keep going, 12, 13, 14, 15. Well done. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. Keep feeling your body, feeling your body. Of course, stretching those shoulders, just feeling your body generally. Here we go. Time's up. Time's up. Let's go for the last set. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3 and go. 1, 2, 3. Enjoy. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, well done. Alright. So remember I said our first workout is going to be the deadlifts. Definitely you're all warmed up right now. So if you don't have weight with you, it's fine. You can just touch the ground and up. Touch the ground and up. But if you have water bottles, you could use them. And there we go, time's up. And if you're in the gym, it's fine. You can pick the dumbbells, or if you have access to weight. So let's go. 1, 2, 3 and move. 1. We're doing 15 times 4. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Well done. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. Walk around. We have 2 more sets to go. 15. We have 15 more seconds to set the next set. Five more seconds left. 5 more seconds. 5 more seconds. And there we go. Time's up. Time's up. Let's go. 1, 2, 3 and move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Well done. Well done. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. We have 10 more seconds to go. 5 more seconds. And our time's up. Last set. Let's go for the last set. 1, 2, 3 and go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and of course 15. Well done. Well done. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. We have 15 more seconds to go. So the next workout we're going to do is a row. So we're going to roll the weight. You will hold each water bottle on each side and bend over and just row it. Alright, so we're going to do bend over row. Hands up. Hands up. we're going to do 15 times 4. So when you pull it up, you hold a bit and then back down. Remember, when you're going down, let your arms stretch all the way. That's when you pull it back. All right, let's go. 1, 2, 3, and move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I know it almost looks like the previous one, but it's different. This one you're only moving the arm up and down. The other one, the whole body is moving. So basically there's a difference between the deadlift and the row. If you're doing this for the first time, they almost seem alike, but for some of us it really looks different. So just copy exactly what I'm doing in this next set. We have 5 more seconds to go and you will definitely get it right. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, and go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. We have 15 more seconds to go. 15 more seconds to go. 1 more set to go of the row. 1 more set to go. And there we go, time's up. Time's up. Let's go for the last set. 1, 2, 3, and go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Our time rest timer starts now. Walk around. Walk around, walk around. We have 15 more seconds to go. 15 more seconds, 10 more seconds, 10 more seconds to go. 5 more seconds. And time's up. Time's up. Our next workout is going to be a shoulder workout. We'll use one of the water bottles first. So you'll take it to the front and up. 1. So we're going to do 20 times 4. 1, 2, 3, and move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 more. 1, 2, keep going. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, go, 9, 8, one more. There we go. Perfect. That was burning. That was burning. So our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. That was burning, but it felt so good. Rest time. You have 15 more seconds. 15 more seconds to go. 15 more seconds. And there we go, our time's up. Yes, it's set number 2. Set number 2, let's kill it. 1, 2, 3, and go. 1, 2, 3, 4, keep going. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, keep going. 16, keep going. 17, 18, 19, one more. 20. Well done, well done, well done. Your rest time starts now. And if you want to stretch those shoulders, just get a wall somewhere and just twist like that, also that way, and just twist like that so that you feel the stretch on the shoulders. All right, we have 10 more seconds to go. 10 more seconds. I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. 5 more seconds. And time's up. Time's up. Let's go. Last set. 1, 2, 3, and move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Last 10. 1. Keep going. 2, 3. It's a mind game. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2 more. 9. 1 more. 10. Well done, well done. If you did that with me, well done. Our rest time starts now. Our rest time starts now. So we're gonna go to the last workout for our shoulders today. Today we were just doing back and shoulders. So the last workout for our shoulders today is going to be upright row. We are going to use the 2 water bottles to do upright row. I will demonstrate, don't worry. In the next 5 seconds, I'll be able to demonstrate. All right. And there we go, time's up. Time's up. All right. So holding the 2 water bottles, you'll do that. But then, if you have only 1 water bottle, you can hold it like that and do that. All right. So we are going to do 15 times 3. 15 times 3. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, and move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Your rest time starts now. Your rest time starts now. Your rest time starts now. We have 2 more sets. If you have done that workout with me so far, you have done well. And if you're still doing the reps, it's okay at your pace. Just get everything done. The whole point is waking up and taking control of your day, and just being on top of things and mentally stable, emotionally stable with this current situation. So let's go to set number 2. Set number 2, 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Well done. Well done. Set number 2 down. Number 2 down. Our rest time. Set now. Set number 2 down. We're almost there. We have 10 more seconds. 10 more seconds to go. 10 more seconds. Three more seconds. And time's up. Last set. Last set. 1, 2, 3, and go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Oh, we say 15. Sometimes we feel generous like that. Our rest time starts now. So we are going to do one finisher. Just take your arms there and here. There and here. We're going to do 30 without taking our arms down. That will be our finisher for today. So we have 15 more seconds. I'm giving you some rest so that the shoulders can marinate a little bit. But then after that, we're just going to kill them totally with that move. So we have 5 more seconds to go. 5 more seconds. 3, 2, and time's up. So hold your arms out straight, completely straight. 1, 2, 3, and go. 1, 2, 3, 4. With me. 5. Don't swing. 7, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. With me. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well done, well done. If you did that with me, you did an amazing job. that's it from here at Tizi Nyumbani. My name is Evelyn Owala of Eval Health and Fitness. Remember to follow us on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, EVEAL on Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Have a lovely day. Go out there and kill that day. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Pishi Home Chef. Oh, just perfect.
We're gonna be cooking breakfast.
Making chicken shikaki, carbonara.
And I'm so happy to be on this show.
Those people think I can't do cooking. I forgot onions.
So I have to call her, literally to call her and ask her, and say your recipe.
Pishi Yohi.
Check out at Pishi254.
Across Africa, countries are adjusting to a once-in-a-century health crisis. To unlock new opportunities, rediscover untapped value addition, accelerate development. Can we, as Africa, strengthen the resilience of business and increase the agility of the labor market? Can we harness the realities of the new norm to power partnerships across sectors, boost production, and deepen shared prosperity even to the most excluded? Nation Media Group brings you the second edition of the Kosi Ideas Festival. The theme, Towards a Post-COVID Africa, Recovering Together. December the 8th and 9th, live from Kisumu.
Davina, listen to me. I am not...
You didn't care if you've hurt Renata, who's been more than a daughter to you, to give Matthias a position that he doesn't deserve.
I have no idea who your informant is, but it's obvious that he hasn't been feeding you the whole story. Then you could be in serious trouble.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know them?
Usilipe kitu ndo upate loan. Stawi is a product by KCB, Cooperative, NCBA and DTB banks and is regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya. Stawi, the lending app that's enabling MSMEs grow their businesses.
Love garlic in your food but hate the hustle of making it? Introducing fresh fried garlic, specially crafted with garlic oil for healthy living. The oil has a beautiful garlic aroma and adds an extra kick when used on your favorite meals. Fresh fried garlic combines wonderfully on salads, stir fries, marination for meat, or simply when sprinkled on your favorite dish. Try fresh fried garlic today. Available in all leading outlets countrywide.
This is NTV.
Hello, East Africa, and a warm welcome to your world this chilly Thursday morning. You've heard of the horrifying stories of people who were captured or lured into forced labor, sexual slavery, and other terrible forms of exploitation. Today, we turn our attention to human trafficking. My name is Joseph Warungu, and coming up, human trafficking status is what we look at. We also look at the challenges around bringing human trafficking to an end in Kenya and around the world.
You are our slaves.
How women fall prey to traffickers as they seek greener pastures abroad. Central African Orchestra looks to revive country's own rhythm. We find out how. Indian Rhino Sanctuary opens for tourists after virus shutdown as mahouts take tourists around riding on elephants. And this morning we're asking you, have you experienced human trafficking or know of someone who's been sold to slavery? What happened and how can this practice be stopped? Engage and share with us on our hashtag #NewNormal. Now, just before we get into our stories this morning, a look at the COVID-19 situation around the world. And as of this moment, 52,432,488 people have so far been confirmed positive for COVID-19, and out of this, 36,675,916 have so far recovered, while sadly, around the globe, we've lost 1,289,000 people, 553. Coming to the African continent, first of all in South Africa, 742,394 people so far confirmed positive. Of these, 686,458 have recovered. In South Africa, as at this moment, they've lost 20,011 people. Closer to our East African region, Kenya first, 65,804 people have so far been confirmed positive, and out of this, 43,626 have recovered, and sadly, here we've lost 1,180 people. To our other neighbors in Uganda, 14,993 people so far confirmed positive. Of these, 7,939 have so far recovered, and in Uganda they've lost 139 people. In Somalia, 4,301 persons have so far been confirmed positive for COVID-19. Out of this, 3,330 have so far recovered, while 107 people have passed on as a result of the disease. Finally, in Rwanda, sorry I can't get that to update at the moment, but that's the situation as it looks at the moment. So now I'll look at some of the stories we have for you this morning. South Africans on the streets of Johannesburg react to the US election results, welcoming the change of leader. With his defeat in the US presidential election, Donald Trump finds himself fighting against being tagged with a label he frequently applies to rivals, but which runs completely counter to his own brand, loser.
Donald Trump doesn't like Africans' country, and he doesn't like blacks in his own country. He don't know what he's doing. You know, it's like he's entertaining the whole world, you know, and of which he paid the price.
I'm happy. Sometimes change is better, so let's experience. See, maybe it's gonna give something better than Donald Trump.
So when he's out, I'm happy. I'm happy. It's not like I'm having like against his wishes or his doings. I'm just like happy that he's out. Now we're waiting for someone that, like to bring like the new positivity.
I'm hoping and keeping my fingers crossed that we're having a different president who's going to change, you know, all this predicament that we're having.
Now, Congo has its rumba. Nigeria has its Afrobeat. But how many people name a musical style specific to the Central African Republic? Very few, even within the country's own borders. Now, in the capital, Bangui, rare are the young people who know of the Montengene, this typically Central African rhythm inherited from the Pygmy tribes of the Southwest. The famous Zokela Orchestra is one of the few to draw on Montengene for its compositions. Saint-Pierre Diaba Along, founder of Zokela, says the Montengene dance is the dance of the caterpillars. It was invented by the Pygmies of the Central African Republic, precisely in the Lobai region, and that's why we use this dance to distinguish ourselves a bit from our brothers, the Congolese, the Ivorians, the Cameroonians. If you didn't know how caterpillars dance, now you do. A black panther that escaped from its owners in 2019 in the French city of Armentières and that was then stolen is believed to be living in a big cat sanctuary in the north of the Netherlands, where she's been taken in by Stichting Lu or Lion Foundation. Animal associations say the panther, now called Aquila, has the same features as the one from France, while French authorities were still waiting for the results of a DNA test to confirm her identity.
It's a strange story. It was the beginning of this year. I got a phone call from a Dutch lady, and she called me and said, I have a friend of a friend, and he's driving around with a black leopard, Aquila. And can you find, do you want to give this panther a home? I said, yes, of course, but is there any paperwork? And there was no paperwork. The panther from France was declawed. They took out the claws. And also this panther is declawed. But we cannot verify it with a chip because she had no claw, and we did the whole investigation together with the Dutch and the French authorities. And we hope that we, in the end, know the result if it's really the panther from France, but I think so.
She was someone that would just lay in the back next to the entrance inside and stay there for a lot of time, just look at everything from a distance. But as of late, it's just going rapidly. She's climbing very much, she's very happy, she's very playful at the moment.
After more than 15 years in Doha, Kenyan national Tina Chada can finally look for a permanent home for herself and her family in Qatar as the country changed its law, offering foreign real estate investors permanent residency benefits and allowing them to stay indefinitely in the country without the fear of losing their sponsors and having to leave without notice.
What's that building over there? I'm looking for something that I can call home long term. So I want something really nice. I've been here for 15 years and the reason I didn't buy earlier was because there was so much grey area regarding the laws. No one was quite sure. There were different answers every time you asked about the residency, whether you would get one. I think it will allow me to call Qatar home. The fact that as an investor, the same amount that I invested in Portugal, for example, for that same amount of money, I get an investor visa, which gives me healthcare, which gives me a permanent residency. So there's a sense of security about it. Before, this wasn't there. And so I feel more comfortable investing now.
So with these high ceilings, it helps create a lot.
I wish they'd put that in place much, much earlier. It would have made way more sense. Even for them, you know, it would have developed a secondary market for their real estate.
You're going to have like a kind of grilled steak restaurant. When you look at the 2030 vision of Qatar, the whole idea is to have expats and locals kind of, you know, working together and trying to promote a long-term outlook for Qatar. And I think in order to do that, you are going to have to be able to allow expats to stay here for the long term. So I think when people see that they now have the option to stay here, you know, indefinitely, provided they've invested, you know, some money in the country, then I think that is a benefit for a lot of people here. But I think there might have been people in the past that have perhaps looked at investing here in Qatar and perhaps haven't done or have gone somewhere else, that with this law in place now, it might get them to open up and look at it as a destination again. Microwave, oven. I don't foresee at this moment in time, because the lockdown's in place from, you know, with other parts of the world, that you're going to have too many international investors investing in Qatar at this time who haven't been here before. I think that will come perhaps as we get closer to 2022 with the World Cup. That Qatar is becoming a place that they want to attract more sports events as well. So it might be that you'll get athletes start to invest here as well, or maybe do warm weather training here like you see a lot of football teams do in Dubai as well. So I think having these, it's trying to just look at different ways to attract people to come to Qatar.
Every year, tens of thousands of Kenyan women leave the country to work abroad, particularly in Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Oman, where they're hired as nannies, cooks and house helps. But exploitation and abuse is rife, with many falling victim to trafficking and serious abuse at the hands of fake recruitment agencies and unscrupulous employers. NTV's Warungu spoke to families who lost their loved ones under unclear circumstances, and women who told her about the physical and emotional scars they experienced while trying to make a living abroad. Here is a shortened version of her 2018 feature, Slavery in the Gulf.
In Molo, Nakuru County, we meet Grace Wangoi. The journey to healing has been slow and painful after the demise of her daughter, who also acted as the family's breadwinner. When Catherine Wangeshi left the country in September 2014 for Saudi Arabia, she expected nothing but the best, and her family was there to support her.
Kaniambia kwamba amepata kazi huko ya kufunza watoto Kiingereza na Kiswahili, na pia kazi ya nyumba alikuwa anafanya.
For 1.5 years, Wangeshi worked as a domestic worker with a family in Riyadh. She was respected, and the money she sent home put her siblings through school and college and paid her mother's hospital bills.
Tulikuwa tukiwasiliana tu vizuri, ananiuliza mambo ya mtoto anaendeleaje. Alikuwa akiwa na furaha hata tukiongea. Namuuliza kuna shida yoyote, ananiambia hapana. Hii familia venye tunakaa hatuna shida. Mpaka mwezi 2016 mwezi wa 5 ndio tulikatiza mawasiliano. Aliniandikia peace call. So nikajaribu kumuita na hatukuweza kwa sababu simu haikuwa inaingia. Nikajaribu the following day pia nikajaribu kumuita, haikuingia, na kutoka hapo mawasiliano ikakatika tu hivyo. Brother yake ndiye alienda Nairobi embassy, lakini ni baada ya miezi 4 kuinsist tujue ni kwa nini hatujakubaliwa tuwe tukiwasiliana naye. Wakaambiwa waandike barua. Sasa ripoti yenye ilirudi ni hiyo ya mambo ya kifo.
In Msambweni, Kwale County, remains of Mwanakombo Mohammed, who also died under mysterious circumstances in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, lies here. Mwanakombo left for Saudi Arabia in 2014, eager to work as a domestic servant and earn a better living for her family. The hard part was bringing her body back home for burial. The fact that Saudi authorities were reluctant to release her body further raised their suspicions. It's not until December 28, 2015 that Mwanakombo's body arrived in Kenya.
Kuelezewa chanzo cha ile kifo yake, hakuna kitu ndioelezewa. Shida ni kwamba ni shingo ndio ilionekana. Kwa postmortem ndio ilivunjika. Broken kabisa, mpaka kaa ile shingo alizikwa shingo iko hivi. Yaani ilivunjika kabisa. Yule jamaa aliwenda akaongea na wale madaktari ile statement wakaandika vile wenyewe wanavyojua. Kwa sababu ikiwa yeye alikufa kule, yeye baina yeye na tajiri, si tajiri anaweza andika tu vile anavyotaka. Nikapewa passport yake na file peke yake. Alikufa alikuwa na pesa nyingine, na hiyo pesa sikupata chochote. Majenti ambao walipeleka bibi yangu, namba za simu niko nazo, lakini nikiwauzungumzia hakuna chochote ninapata. Sasa amekufa bibi yako na umepata mwili wake, mambo yake yamekufa, hiyo ni mambo ya Mungu. Story nyingine hakuna.
Okay, really touching story there of what happens with some of the Kenyans and other Africans abroad, especially in the Gulf states. And you can catch the rest on YouTube by searching for Slavery in the Gulf. Now, welcome to our program this morning, which focuses on human trafficking. And with me, first of all, here in the studio, Julian Duta. She's the National Project Manager, Love Justice International Kenya. And also via Zoom, we're joined by Sophie Otiende, who is a feminist, survivor, and advocate against human trafficking. A little later on, we'll also be linking up with Peter Muremi, award-winning documentary producer and director, who will be speaking to us from London. But first, to you, Julian, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with your reaction to that story that we just showed about what happens in some of the Gulf states.
Yes, this is something that has been happening for some time now, and it's something that is in the general public's knowledge. However, they don't understand the intricacies of how these people get the jobs abroad and what kind of work they actually find there, because there's usually a distinct difference between what you can be told you're going to do in Kenya and when you get there, the kind of systems that you find, the fact that the language is different, and the fact that the homes are run different. So what we need to first start off with is just understanding that human trafficking does not only, that's just one case of a type of human trafficking, but there are many various forms and purposes for exploitation under even our laws.
Okay. And to you, Sophie, good morning. I don't know whether you were able to see that story, and what are your thoughts on what happens in some of these places?
I think I'll probably just say the same thing that Julian has said. First of all, I would, again, if any of the family members is watching, we are really deeply sorry for that. As Julian has said, this is one of the stories that has mostly been highlighted by the media in terms of trafficking. So when you talk about trafficking, there are different forms, and this is one of the forms that has most people in Kenya, you speak about trafficking, this is the form that most people can identify with. But we need to recognize that this is not the only form. We have a lot of trafficking happening within the country that is almost similar to what you're seeing outside the country. So it's easy for us to point fingers at what is happening in Saudi Arabia, but it's a whole structural issue. You know, it's a structural issue of what do we do to actually prevent vulnerable people from being abused.
And Sophie, when you give us examples of what happens in country in Kenya, examples of other forms of human trafficking?
So most of the time I ask people this question because it's something when I speak to people on the ground, I say most of us, especially if you're around 30 years and above like me, Most of us have lived with relatives in our houses who are young children, are supposed to be in school, and were working in our homes and did not go to school. In most cases, those situations are situations of domestic servitude. And most people see that, recognize that, and cannot be able to say that that's trafficking. We have a lot of cases that have been highlighted in the media of Ugandan children that are brought across the border and basically abused in homes as house helps. They're physically abused, they're sexually abused in those homes with no recourse. At the moment, we have a lot of Tanzanian children that are begging on the streets. Most of the disabled kids that are begging on the streets of Nairobi are Tanzanian children who've been brought by traffickers who are collecting that money. That money does not benefit any of those children. But then when you look at all the structural issues around things like people with disabilities, how would you be able to rescue them and take care of them in a safe and well manner? It's extremely difficult. So it's deeper than, just people going to Saudi Arabia, as Julian has emphasized.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Julian, in a nutshell, what really constitutes human trafficking?
So I'll start with the law. Regionally and internationally, because this is one of the most serious forms of crimes that is happening all over the world. So there is the United Nations conventions, which Kenya is a party to, and we have one that is against transnational organized crime, and another one specifically for preventing, suppressing and punishing the exploitation of women and children, especially because they are the ones that go through this the most. And Kenya has, these were actually agreed upon in 2000, and in 2010 Kenya came up with the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act, which now provides for which makes provision for what countering human trafficking in Kenya is all about. And in section 3 it talks about what human trafficking is, which includes basically the recruitment, the transportation, the harboring of people with a means of deception, for instance, fraud and all of that leads to a sort of a type of exploitation, domestic servitude being one of them, which is under forced labor. There's child trafficking that Sophie has talked about, where children end up being trafficked for purposes of like adoptions, for instance. There are also instances where they're employed when they're not supposed to for harmful cultural practices such as child marriage, for instance, female genital mutilation. So the purposes are wide, and most people know about domestic servitude and sex trafficking. And also there's also organ harvesting, for instance, that happens. So all of that is handled in the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act in section 3, which provides for the punishment of 30 years imprisonment or a fine of 30 million shillings.
So to Sophie's point, when someone has, someone who's under 16 working for them at home, even with the blessings of the parent of that child, and they are actually paying the parents, is that still
Yes,
trafficking?
That is child exploitation, because essentially that child should be in school getting an education so that they can better themselves. And hence that's why even in the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, we have the 4th goal being free education for all, which should be quality education. And hence you see countries like Kenya pushing for children to at least in the minimum go to primary school. And now we are seeing pushes for them to also go to secondary school so that they can better their futures.
Okay. Now, Sophie, just before we come to your own experience, I'm interested in the hows and the when, the trafficking, who's involved in trafficking, why does it happen, how does it happen, what would you say to that?
I think most of the time, and this is what I say, most of the time when the narrative around trafficking is such that we like to see perpetrators as other people rather than as ourselves. And the reality is trafficking is everywhere. Perpetrators is all of us. Because if we think about culturally how, like the examples we are giving, the house helps that are taking care of us, I tell people the clothes you are wearing, the phones you are carrying are as a result of forced labor. Some child in the Congo basically was probably abused for you to have the phone that you are carrying at the moment. So when you talk about the how and the when, we need to move the narrative more towards we having a culture that does not promote abuse because of the demand and the things that we're actually putting out, the demand for cheap things, the demand for cheap labor, and the fact that we don't put enough social protection systems for poor people means that people end up being abused. As Juliana said, most people can, because of privilege, can be able to go to school, but the same people that are taking their children to school have no problem taking a poor person and basically abusing them in their home as house helps. So we have to talk about also the cultural aspect and the fact that as people who exploitation has been part and parcel of, the economy as we know it. The economy, capitalism promotes human trafficking, essentially, if we talk about it, because that's the reality. You think about our economy as it exists. We don't have even structures for workers to be paid properly. We talk about things like minimum wage and the fact that those are just suggestions. People are not really actually criminalized for these things. And it's that kind of environment that ultimately leads to trafficking.
Oh, okay, so now, Sophie, your organization, Love Justice, works around the world, not just here in Africa. What are the kind of examples of rackets that are still going on, even as we speak?
Thank you so much. Yes, so we are working in Asia and we're working in Africa primarily. We are focused on land. Our prevention model is quite different. Most people do prevention in terms of on-the-ground talking and creating awareness, while we do actual talking to victims who are, or potential victims of trafficking, who are on the move just before the point of exploitation. So we work on land transit monitoring and air transit monitoring, meaning on land we're working at border points, bus stations, train stations, whatever may be in the country that we have set up. And we also work in airports. For instance, in South Africa, we are working at the OR Tambo Airport, where, for instance, we know South Africa is a destination country for so many people, where we see in Kenya we are a source, destination and transit country. So a number of people are coming through Kenya to South Africa, for instance, and so we are able to prevent the exploitation in South Africa by undertaking what we call intercepting, by using a special questioning protocol to prevent now the trafficking of the persons.
And what kind of trends are you noticing?
The trends that we are noticing is a lot of people are coming for domestic, especially domestic work. We are seeing a number of people, for instance, leaving Kenya, like in the case of Qatar, we know about domestic servitude cases. However, there's also men who are going to work in the construction industry because, for instance, Qatar is supposed to host the next World Cup, for instance. So we find cases of men also being taken there for exploitation. We see cases of children being transported for instance, from Kenya to Tanzania for purposes of witchcraft, for instance. We see cases where children are also being taken for false adoptions, as they're called, or adoptions that end up being the trafficking of the child. So the other ones that we see are also people who are given an opportunity that seems to be a white-collar job, but when they actually get there, they end up being harbored in a room, for instance, and end up being sexually exploited. And so those are just some of the few trends that we have identified.
Where do you draw the line between someone who's gone out there to seek an opportunity, but they're not very well paid? The boundary between that and servitude?
Yes, so just as what Sophie said, it's usually a very thin line. And for instance, countries have specific minimum wages that are set up. So what has happened is sometimes, for instance, in the case of domestic servitude, it becomes a little difficult to actually draw the line on how much someone is supposed to be paid, because how someone manages their house is very different from individual to individual. So the best thing that we can do, one is advise the people and give them safe migration advice for the opportunities that they want to, whether it's internally in Kenya or out of Kenya. The other thing that we do is we constantly engage with different stakeholders to agree on the minimum standards, for instance, that need to be set for employees out there. So for instance, there'll be a bilateral agreement between Kenya and Qatar that exists, and also between Kenya and Saudi Arabia, in which there's supposed to be now the minimum set for how much are these people who are going out there are supposed to be paid.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Sophie, from your own experience and observation, what do you see? Where are we at in terms of human trafficking? Is it getting worse? Are we making any headway?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, because essentially when you think about trafficking and you think about the fact that trafficking is a clandestine crime, and the fact that the state of our evidence in terms of the information we currently have on trafficking is quite wanting, it's very difficult to say the state that we are in. If you think about it, it's now 20 years since the Palermo Protocol was passed, and we've defined trafficking as we've defined it. It's 20 years. In Kenya, it's 10 years since we've had the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act. So I'll start at home in Kenya. The Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act was passed in 2010. Up to now, Julian is a lawyer, she might correct me if I'm wrong. Up to now, we do not have gazetted guidelines for implementing the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act. I might be wrong. Maybe they were passed while I was not aware, but I'm not aware that there's been gazettement of Counter-Trafficking in Persons guidelines, which means that, and Julian will tell you, that it is very difficult to implement a law that does not have guidelines. It means that there are so many loopholes that basically perpetrators and in general, people, practitioners that are working on this issue to implement and actually fight this.
So, Sophie, let me... let me pause you for a moment. I just want to get the confirmation from the lawyer.
I am also not aware that it has been passed.
Right.
Yes.
Which means it's really hard to control or to stop the...
Yes, and also just to give practitioners the guiding principles on how to prevent, for instance, or how to execute the law as it is. And you know, sometimes the legal process does take a number of steps, and even the legal hurdles are many, including in parliament. Hence the number of lobbying activities that are happening, for instance, with parliamentarians, just to also push this further. So I would say we just need to keep working closer with the government to push for these regulations to be in place, to make both our work as people who are supporting and civil society organizations that are supporting the government in preventing human trafficking to be able to implement effectively.
And Sophie, even though I think in the past we've seen instances where magistrates and other judiciary staff have been trained and sensitized on how to handle this human trafficking, is that enough?
No, it's a drop in the bucket. That's the reality. And while we are still trying to figure out, and I say this all the time, while we are still trying to figure out whatever it is we are trying to figure out as practitioners, and we are sitting in meetings and having wonderful trainings and discussing, someone is being raped somewhere, someone is being abused somewhere, and we need to think about what that looks like in context. I honestly think 10 years to gazette guidelines is just not acceptable. And I know that I'm constantly seen as an activist in that. I think it's absolutely unacceptable that we have an act that has been around for 10 years and we haven't gazetted guidelines to implement it. The government owes survivors of trafficking, at a bare minimum, gazetted guidelines to implement the act. So while I think conversations, the discussions around civil society and government and the work that is being done, some of it is actually commendable. But I find it unacceptable, again, that the lives of survivors are actually left to the goodwill of the people that take care of them. Right now, let's leave alone government. NGOs can easily abuse the survivors that they are taking care of, and survivors of trafficking would have no recourse or no standard to actually say, this is exactly what went wrong. Because at the end of the day, if someone assists you, we clap for them. Wonderful. You've done amazing work because you've rescued so-and-so, you've helped so-and-so. And I've said, survivors should not be begging for services. If you've suffered an injustice, you should not be begging for services. The system owes you. It owes you justice. So for me, looking at a system that currently, even when you look at the activism around trafficking, how many survivors are included in, the activities, the things that we are actively doing? You look at a movement like the gender-based violence and all this other, you can actually hear voices of survivors being included and things actually happening. So right now, most of the work that is being done in counter-trafficking is really, according to me, it depends on the person that you get for you to get quality service as a survivor, and for me that's unacceptable. Okay,
thank you, Sophie, for that. Now, what's the issue here, Julian, in terms of why there is no urgency at a legal level to address this? Is it that this is not really a big priority for society and government?
I think it is definitely a priority, and just as also Sophia said, that there are a number of conversations that have been going on. However, as she said, there are some things that are happening that are unacceptable, and so the hurdles that we are facing, for instance, if we have duplication of efforts, for instance, between, let's say, even government and even stakeholders, we do have, I must commend the government, we do have a counter-trafficking in Persons Secretariat, who I believe, for instance, should continue working with the civil society organizations, for instance, to provide better, effective services for victims of trafficking, including also pushing for these regulations that are much needed for the implementation of the Act. We also have the push from also the international community. So as counter-trafficking in persons organizations, last year we were involved in the Universal Periodic Review, which is basically a UN process where countries actually peer review each other according to their human rights compliance. And so we wrote specific things as civil society that we think the government should put in place in order to basically help the survivors and victims of trafficking, which includes even just accessing a trust fund that has been established within the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act. So one, I would want to say our legal system needs to move a bit faster than it really does, and also for us to work together and not duplicate efforts. The other thing that as CSOs we've done so that we can avoid with the duplication is we came up with a coalition of NGOs that want to work towards the prevention of human trafficking by working together, regardless of what our niche is, whether that's the prevention, the prosecution towards combating human trafficking. And so Stop the Traffic was formed, which now pushes for some of these talks, even with government and international organizations. Okay, now, Sophie, you're a survivor yourself and a big advocate, campaigning against this terrible, practice. What is your story?
What is my story? My story is almost like most Kenyan children, as I was saying. I'm a survivor of domestic servitude, and I was trafficked at 13 within the family and couldn't be able to access school for a whole year, and I was abused. I'm lucky because, and I say this all the time, as a feminist, I can acknowledge what my privileges are, and my privileges are that I had educated parents that ensured that after my experience, I still went to school, and I'm here because of that. So most of the survivors that I've taken care of in the past and the survivors that we know don't end up having the opportunities that I have. So I take very seriously the opportunities or the chance that I have to sit in panels like this, because I know the survivors that we take care of will never be able to sit where Julian is sitting or where I'm sitting to be able to discuss the issues as we are discussing them. And for me, that is very, very sad, because if we sit and continuously pat ourselves on the back and say that what we are doing is enough, when we can't have survivors that can be able to do the work that we are doing, for me, we are not there yet. I'm sorry. We are not. I know that it's difficult work. I know that it is hard, but we are just not there yet. When we look at the support that we offer survivors, how many survivors in Kenya can become, the support we are offering them can make them become lawyers like Julian, or can make them do the work that I do. So for me, the gap, there's a huge disconnect between what needs to be done, the quality of care that survivors need to have, and what is currently there.
Sophie, sorry to take you back a little bit. For those who may not be very familiar with what you have gone through, how bad was your experience, and then what kind of support did you get, once the ordeal was over?
None. So, which is apart from my family, I received zero services. The resilience, and that's why I can boldly speak in panels like this, because I know I owe no one, absolutely no one, apart from my family. The resilience and healing that I have, there's no organization that I owe. I commend Heart Kenya, Awareness Against, who basically identified later on now, a few years back, they identified that my story was trafficking, and they allowed me to actually speak and become the advocate that I am. But essentially, most survivors of trafficking do not receive help. They don't receive help because there isn't help. There aren't enough organizations that are providing support, quality support, to survivors of trafficking. There aren't. I've said this before. If you think about, I'll give my example. I've had mental health, and so many people that I know, survivors of trafficking, end up struggling with trauma, suicide, and all this for years. It can take you up to more than 20 years to recover from trauma. In Kenya, I'm not even sure if we have 100 psychiatrists. Let's not even talk about the ones that take care of victims of trafficking. In general, when we talk about the state of mental health in Kenya, which, if we are talking about trauma, you'd be talking survivors of trafficking go through multiple forms of abuse, physically, mentally. So you are talking about someone who's deeply traumatized. And yet we have a support system that doesn't even have qualified people.
Okay,
for me, it's not, when we talk about it's really a state of emergency. We have survivors who are killing themselves, killing themselves because they cannot be able to access help.
Okay, Sophie, the
women that have been shown in that clip, some women commit suicide.
Let me pause you a little bit, but I want to come back onto some of the issues that you raised there. But first, Kenyans working in Saudi Arabia were expected to enjoy better working conditions after the government signed a pact with the Middle Eastern state that will clean up the recruitment process and see workers earn higher perks while signing a bilateral agreement with the government of Saudi Arabia. Then Labour Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatan said the recruitment will be done electronically with only 100 agencies authorized to offer employment. This is how NTV first reported this story.
In the past, cases of abuse, torture and violation of contracts of Kenyans working in Saudi Arabia have been rampant. In 2014, the outcry forcing the government to issue an employment ban against Kenyans seeking opportunities in Saudi Arabia. But in 2017, the government lifted the ban, promising to tighten laws to ensure safety of Kenyans working in the Gulf state. Now, recruitment agencies for locals seeking employment in Saudi Arabia will be required to submit 1.5 million shillings as security bond with a bank or an insurance firm and have their agencies listed on the National Employment Agency's website.
The reason as why they are paying 1.5 million Kenya shilling in form of security deposit is to ensure that, should any worker that goes through their hand get challenges, this money can be used to provide air tickets for those Kenyan workers in distress. But you are going for, as a domestic worker, you'll also additionally be, it's compulsory that you're going to take a course on home care management, where issues of, cooking, taking care of the elderly, taking care of children, taking care of the home.
As part of the agreement, Saudi Arabia will be required to protect the rights of both employers and domestic workers.
We have the electronic system that ensure that all the domestic laborers are coming through the official way, through one channel system that connect all the authorities here in Kenya and Saudi Arabia together.
Under the agreement, Kenyan domestic workers in Saudi Arabia will take home an average salary of 30,000 shillings, excluding benefits such as medical, housing and transport. The workers will also be compensated.
Okay, that report by our former reporter Lillian Carey. Now, earlier this year, 32 young women were arrested at a hideout in Penyanya area of Dandora. The women were believed to have been on a mission to travel to Saudi Arabia for domestic jobs. They were being held against their will with promises from their agent to get them to Saudi Arabia. Police officers received a tip-off from members of the public who were suspicious of the activities being carried out in the house. One of the women said they'd been locked in the house for weeks.
Je, nikienda Saudia nitateseka kiasi gani? Kama kufungiwa ndani ya utoki, mnaambiwa mko na choo na bafu. Sasa mnaenda kutafuta nini nje?
So Julian, we're a long way from stopping that.
Yes. One thing that we need to know is human trafficking is also known in other jurisdictions as modern-day slavery. Slavery has always been a part of us. However, the more enlightened that we have become, the more efforts have been made to ensure that people have the right to refuse work. And being in a state of slavery is being prevented from refusing certain work. And one of the things is that different people look for work from different avenues, and that's how human trafficking comes in. The people are moving from one area to another for an opportunity that in most instances turns exploitative. This should also be separated from smuggling, for instance. People associate smuggling and human trafficking to be the same thing when they are two distinct crimes. Smuggling is the transportation of someone across borders. So it's actually a crime against the state, while human trafficking is a crime against a person and a person's dignity. So what happens is, in these cases where we've seen people being locked in a place and they're not being given the freedom to move in and out, that is an exploitative situation, because as a human being, you're born with the right to move and to make decisions that would allow you to better your life, for instance. So in such cases where ladies are recruited and then kept in a certain place for a certain amount of time before they get their opportunity, that's a case of harboring, which is a crime in the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act. This is also connected to the issue of human trafficking being not just one crime, but a series of crimes, both against a person and also against a state, where you see there are foreigners who are smuggled into Kenya and then exploited here, or smuggled across all our borders into another place where they are exploited. So in the case of people being called in for a job, there are many cases of unethical recruitment that are happening, and hence now there are more questions of how is this unethical recruitment coming in. And that's why the government created this agency called the National Employment Agency that actually vets and verifies people who should actually undertake recruitment. Now when it comes to being able to stop these people from undertaking an ethical recruitment, one thing the government has done is these people are supposed to pay a bond, including also if there are cases of someone who went and got exploited and they went through your agency, they're supposed to provide support for them. The other thing is that they're supposed to renew their licenses on a yearly basis. And so even during that period, the government should actually be looking through the operations of these agencies, because if
if they've been
to check if they're actually doing what they're supposed to do according to the law.
Okay, now Sophie, let me come to you. As a 13-year-old, how much choice did you have, if any, in making decisions about your life and what you could or could not do?
So again, that's a really interesting question. I had no choice, and my expectation was that, my expectation is that there was a system that should be able to protect the fact that I had no choice. I would like to actually speak to the whole, the whole recruitment agencies. While I think it's commendable that the government is making all these bilateral, agreements with Saudi Arabia and with all these countries. But until the kafala system, anybody that has worked with survivors knows that until the kafala system is abolished, it's really going to be difficult to implement some of these bilateral agreements.
Can you explain that?
Then we ask ourselves about the practicality of, right now, those bilateral agreements have been signed. If you ask how many organizations that are currently doing awareness in communities, if they know and have seen and understand the information in that bilateral agreement, many people will tell you no. How are people on the ground who are vulnerable supposed to access this information and ensure that they are protected by the system? And for me, it always goes back to that. We can put very, very beautiful and wonderful systems in place, but if the vulnerable people who this system is supposed to protect do not know about it and cannot access it, then it means that we are still not there yet. So right now, most of the people that would probably be recruited, as Julian has said, there are a lot of agencies that are illegal, that are operating illegally. Is that how will the whole issue of the bilateral agreement protect people from that? Most people, and I would say most feminists, have spoken about power and how essentially as a house help or someone who's a domestic worker, once you're inside someone's house, it's extremely difficult to start talking about what your rights are and what you can be able to do, especially in a foreign country. And I will mention one last thing when it again comes to the whole issue of arrests and now people coming back home. Most people, once they've been abused and try to access help. So for most of the cases that I've encountered when I was working with survivors is that the person who's employed you will accuse you of stealing. After they accuse you of stealing in the house, they've abused you, they'll accuse you of stealing. After they've accused you of stealing, they'll send you to a detention camp somewhere in Saudi Arabia. Once they send you in a detention camp, it's up to you and your family to figure out how you get yourself home. So while I agree, the bilateral agreement will help, they will mostly help people with privilege that can be able to access that information and actually figure out how to implement it.
Okay. Sophie, thank you so much. Now, just to you, Julian, as well, on the issue of actually on choice, really. Some of these people, it's against their will. Some, it's on false pretenses that maybe there is better opportunities that await them wherever they are going, whether it's South Africa or the Gulf states.
Yes, so the crime of human trafficking has three major elements that, for instance, law enforcement would look into. One is the act of trafficking, the act of the transportation, the recruitment, the harboring. And then you get into the means. The means is the coercion, the force, the threats, the use of your power over someone else to do something. There's also the receiving and the payment of benefits so that you can get you can like literally possess a person. And then there's now the acts of trafficking, the actual purposes of trafficking, which are
it's a complex business.
It's very complex, and it's transnational, and most times it's even related to other crimes that are going on, and that's why I said it's not one crime, but it's many crimes in one. And for instance, we talked about the kafala system. Basics from what I know is it's basically a sponsorship system where, for instance, if you go into Qatar, for instance, you have to be given a certain visa that's linked, or contract that's linked to one person, and you can't change that until you get the permission of that person. Exactly. Yeah. But in my recent reading, I actually saw that Qatar has actually put down some measures in order to reduce the kafala system, to allow for people to change their contracts once they get there. So what happens in cases like when you go abroad to Qatar or the Middle East and you're bonded to a certain employer, one, the choice you may have that most people opt for is you run away, or you lie that maybe someone has died at home because your contract is, let's say, for 2 or 3 years, and then you come back home, and there's some that are not fortunate that end up being stranded there, where we see what we saw in Lebanon just the other day, where a number of migrant workers have gone abroad and they can't, get their way back home. So it's quite complex.
Thanks, Gillian. And talking about law enforcement now, in March last year, detectives from the Directorate of Criminal Investigations arrested 3 suspects alleged to be involved in human trafficking in Isiolo County. 8 victims of Eritrean nationality, aged between 17 and 31 years, were rescued by the detectives. The arrests and rescue were made after a vehicle stop at Wamba Junction in Isiolo County. 3 suspects, Al-Habas Ali, Abdi Hassan and Ibrahim Aidan, were taken into police custody, but 1 suspect escaped. Police impounded 2 vehicles said to have been used to transport the victims. Okay, time now to take a short break from our discussion on human trafficking. We'll be right back shortly.
Do you need to send your parcel or document during this period? The Nation Courier Services, with over 15 years of distribution experience, will deliver it for you. We deliver to every corner of Kenya. Due to our strong distribution network, have overnight door-to-door service and same-day intra-city service with the security and safety of the client's shipment guaranteed. Your parcel is our priority. We'll deliver it for you. Contact us for delivery on courierservices@ke.nationmedia.com or call 0719 038 739. On Unscripted with Grace.
When I lost him, I think I lost myself. I lost myself so completely.
Until death do us part. A wedding vow that isn't waited upon with bated breath by anyone.
I'm still trying to adjust.
But what if the family that you married into ensure that you and your children lose everything?
It's such a big deal.
What do you do and where do you turn?
Join Grace Musalame this Saturday from 8 p.m. only on NTV.
What a relief! Thank you, Gold Crown. If regular milk makes you feel uncomfortable, try Gold Crown lactose-free milk. Milk that loves you.
Scott Christian University invites you to its 55th graduation ceremony, which will be held on Friday, November 13th at the main campus in Machakos town off Kangundo Road. The chief guest will be His Excellency Honorable Dr. Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka. Catch the proceedings live on NTV Friday from 10 a.m. Scott Christian University, a dynamic center of academic excellence.
Epuka giza sasa na mshumaa wa Sumo. Mshumaa wa Sumo umetengenezwa kwa bidhaa bora zaidi na unakufaa wakati wote. Kila mara unapowaza kuhusu mwangaza katika nyumba yako, waza mshumaa wa Sumo. Unachomeka polepole bila kumwagika na hauishi haraka, hauna moshi wala harufu. Jipatie mshumaa wa Sumo katika duka lililo karibu nawe kwa bei nafuu. Kwa maelezo zaidi, tembelea afisi zetu katika barabara ya Ndume Road, mkabala na Lungalunga Road, nyuma ya Carton Manufacturer, karibu na stage ya matatu ya Sinai. Unaweza pia wasiliana nasi kupitia 0722575619 au 0736028181. Ni mshumaa wa Sumo Kando kutoka Rock Industries Limited.
Collect your invoice from our cash office at Times Tower Banking Hall or City Hall and Makadara offices and pay it today only through the Nairobi County Revenue Collection accounts at Cooperative Bank of Kenya. You stand to gain 100% from the 100% waiver extension. At the end of the waiver period, KRA will institute enforcement measures.
Jiko Koa, Kenya's highest saving, longest lasting and biggest Jiko, cooks fast using half the charcoal compared to other Jikos, so you use less fuel and receive extra savings. Enjoy our great discounts and save an extra 500 Kenya shillings when you buy Jiko Koa at your nearest shopping outlet.
Program ikaleta hizi radio na solar zitusaidia kuniwezesha kuendelea kusoma hata kama ni usiku. But ka savings to fly singeweza kufika hapa hata penye nipo.
Oh my, oh my, oh my days. Life is wonderful. Life is wonderful. Life is wonderful.
Every spoonful of Nutri comes loaded with the necessary vitamins, protein and minerals for you and your family to become healthier and stronger. Pick up a pack today from your nearest store. Nutri, every spoonful counts.
Welcome back to the program. My name is Joseph Warungu, and this morning we are focused on human trafficking. With me is a panel of people who have a thing or two to say about this area or this illegal practice. Here in the studio, Julian Nduta, who's the National Project Manager for Love Justice International Kenya. We are also joined via Zoom by Sophie Otiende, who is a feminist survivor and advocate against the practice of human trafficking. And from London via Zoom, we're also joined by Peter Murimi, award-winning documentary producer and director. Bwana Murimi, welcome to the show this morning. Good morning.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, now, just before we get into the discussion, you've been making a film. It's out now. Let's see what it's all about. Now, here is the trailer of Imported for My Body, the exemplary work of Peter Murimi.
African women lured to India.
The first day I went there, I looked and I saw so many girls.
Exploited for sex. One of the victims, Grace, goes undercover for Africa Eye to expose a network of sex traffickers satisfying the demands of African men living in India. BBC Africa Eye, Imported for My Body.
Okay, so Bwana Murimi, what's the film? That was the trailer. What's it all about?
So the film, I was the producer for the film, and the film was directed by Nyasha. And Nyasha had made a story on Grace the year before last year. And between that and when they made contact, Grace had been trafficked to India, and she had been promised that she's going to be a tour guide in India. And for some reason, she believed that, and she went to India. When she got there, her passport was confiscated, and she was working in these underground bars called kitchens. And in the kitchens, most of the clients were Africans, and basically, she was told her debt was $3,000, and she had to sleep with men to pay back her debt. So the film, basically, the director connected with Grace just when she was about finishing a debt, and we helped her. We finished the debt, but then she exposed the women that trafficked her. So Grace goes undercover and basically films the whole network in India, in Delhi, and the problems that women go through. And this film hopefully will be used as a public awareness tool for other women to know what's happening in India.
What was your experience of making this film?
Gosh, it was very challenging, very shocking. I remember the first time we went to India, and we were talking with Grace, and she showed the whole network to us, and we were making plans of basically exposing it. And what shocked me was the scale of how many women were trapped in this cycle. And the problem is, even after you finish your debt, because you've overstayed your visa, it becomes really hard to come back. So the desperation of the women was really, really shocking to me.
And Grace's experiences?
I guess the thing is, it's for anybody to go through that, it is very traumatic. But now she's back in Kenya, she's rebuilding herself, and she's moving on with life. So she's come out of it, I think, better and stronger.
What do you hope the film will achieve?
It's two things. I remember the biggest one actually is as a public awareness tool, because there's so many people who are told, just get on the plane, the grass is greener on the other side. And I'm hoping this film can show people like you have to really think twice when you're told there's an opportunity, like it's much better than Kenya, like you really think twice. And that is the primary motivation and objective for the whole team. Nyasha, the director, me as a producer, and the team, was that public awareness. The other thing we were hoping, because of the exposure, at least the network could be dismantled. I know it was disruptive, but I don't think it dismantled it. But at least that disruption also is good, because it's basically slowed the tracks.
And now, Murimi, from your experience of producing this film, what can you tell us about how that kind of trafficking actually works, the people involved, the kind of money, the kind of, just how the whole thing works?
So what is very interesting is it's like a pyramid kind of system. So for example, Grace, who was trafficked to India, So after she had paid her debt, what happens naturally is, because you overstayed your visa, it becomes much harder to come back home. You become a trafficker. Now you lure other women to come to India, and they work under you. And basically, especially what we found out in India, there is this organization called ASCA, which is basically the network of men that protect this trafficking, and they are the ones who the money trickles up to. They run the kitchens, they get protection money. Whenever there's a dispute, the madam and the women, they're the ones who resolve the dispute at a fee. So basically, there's this group of men at the top who are the ones who are benefiting from the money or proceeds of trafficking. But this pyramid system, like the trafficked becomes the trafficker. That is the sad thing about this.
So it's essentially an industry.
A multi-million industry. And we know in India it's a big deal, but also it's happening in Dubai, in the Middle East. So it's a multi-million industry, and it is global, and that's a big problem.
Okay, Moremi, stay on the line for us as I turn to Julian. These are familiar examples for what this film covers for you?
Yes.
Because I know you work, in Asia as well.
Yes, very familiar stories. In fact, we do have Love Justice India that work on that. In fact, in India, we work on both cases of sexual exploitation because there are a number of brothels there for even Indian women themselves. And then there's also the border work we do between Nepal and India. And you can even relate this to a case of Nepalese girls who are found in Kenya working in Indians dance clubs here in Kenya. So it's very transnational, it's very interconnected, and the networks go as far and wide and even in high offices, if I might say so.
I know, as Peter mentioned there, and this whole business of the exploited becoming the exploiter, which it means that the cycle just continues.
Yes, like the pyramid schemes that we see, once you get one person, you keep going higher in it, and some of them honestly are forced to get into exploiting others for the same thing, because most times what happens is you get into debt bondage. So for instance, you get someone says they want to employ you abroad, they pay for all your travel expenses, and once you get there, your salary is supposed to be deducted, or most times some people withhold their salary until they recoup the amount of money they used in getting you there. So people find themselves under states of debt bondage, and in order to get out of debt, one, you either take more debts from home, or you do some kind of either illegal activity so that you can be able to get money. And what happens is, even in the act, sometimes because victims find themselves in such cases, they're not supposed to be criminalized for anything that takes place while they're in the state of human trafficking, for instance.
Okay. Sophie, your thoughts as well on this issue?
Yeah, I think I remember watching Nyasha's video and being really, being really, disturbed by what was going on. The truth is, there's a demand for these things, and that means that people end up in the situations that they end up in. When we talk about, as Julian has said, when we talk about survivors or victims now ending up being perpetrators, and as we are saying, it's the nature of trauma and the nature of survival. Because as soon as someone has been abused, let's say for 3-4 years, working, you've not been paid, you've been working in a brothel every single day making money for someone. As Peter has said, you probably run away and decide, let me go to the embassy and actually find a way to, get out. When you get there, your government actually tells you, or you are told at the embassy that, right now your documentation is not legal. If you're not identified at that point as a victim of trafficking, and you're treated as a migrant who understands their rights and is not going through trauma, you will be told, with the Indian system, you will be told for every single day, every single month you've stayed, overstayed your visa, there's money to pay. That money that you're paying, let's say, and we are also looking at the system we live in. If one relative of ours travels abroad, all of us get excited, all of us think they're making money. Think about this young woman who's left and gone to India, has been away maybe for 2 years, and is trying to come back home and tell the family that she doesn't have money. In fact, she's in debt and needs to pay off that debt. How many families would even be supportive of that situation? So many victims find themselves in situations where even your family back at home is telling you that you are lying about that situation. Okay. So it's totally understandable for someone in that position to then make a decision and say, you know, I have to survive. And this is how I will survive.
Okay. Sophie, thank you. Now, Murimi, let's talk about Grace for a moment. First of all, the practicalities of filming. This is a non-journalist whom you've presumably equipped with hidden cameras or whatever it was to go undercover. What did you have to do to equip Grace to do this task? Sorry, I think you're on mute, and I don't know.
No, my fault. It was a very rigorous process. Like, we had to train Grace, but also we had also to have like a very robust security plan. And we were always had a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And the thing is, like, big up to Grace, because what she did was like really brave. And she was saying, especially her big motivation was, I'm doing this so that people back home, people like me, can know what's going on here. But we had to train her like for weeks and weeks, and we used to have proper security plans, A and B and C. And whenever something did not go to plan, there's always an alternative. But as you say, you could have as many plans as you want, but it's always up to the whistleblower, and her motivation and her bravery is what carried the day.
And so for Grace in doing this, what were her needs? What kind of state was she in terms of what she had gone through? Did she have any trauma issues? And you know, what kind of Grace did you encounter when you first met?
So actually we met her towards the end of the stay, and as everyone knows, what she went through is tough. And also I remember after when she got back to Kenya, she had to go through some counseling. So which is difficult. But she pulled through. She's doing much better now, moving on with her life. But at that time, actually, I guess for anybody, even if I was to go through that, it's really tough on the person, and it just needs very big mental strength to endure and persevere.
What had an impact on you in terms of what you filmed, what you captured on the film, and the situation of this trafficking scenario?
For me, what captured me is the entrapment and spiral, because you can really see like there is no way out. If I was in that situation, I could not go out, and I can see easily how sometimes the only way is to continue to try and survive in that system, and you end up being caught there forever as an endless loop, being a madam and trying to go higher and higher. And the more you stay in India, you become illegal. So legally, it makes also difficulty to get back home. So being entrapped in that web shocked me, and there is no way out. You know, some people, as I said, Sophie was saying, like, you cannot just go to the embassy and like, I want to go back home. It's impossible. When you go back to the police, you cannot go. You've overstayed, and some of the police are corrupt in India. It's not a way out. So I was shocked by the lack of options for these women.
Did you share your findings with the authorities, and was any action taken?
So at the end of the filming, we passed all our investigation to the local authorities. I know the people that we exposed went underground for a while, and I'm not in India anymore, so I don't know what's happening. But initially, I think the film had a small disruption. to the specific network, not the whole thing, but the specific network. But after that, I don't know.
Okay, which thank you, Peter. Which brings me to Julian and the subject of law enforcement. What are the challenges in the law enforcement trying to bring this kind of trafficking to a halt?
The first thing I would like to highlight is that there are government, or should I say National Police Service has actually created agencies that are specifically fighting transnational organized crime. That's under the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. And then specifically, there's a child protection unit that also deals with anti-human trafficking and dealing with child trafficking cases specifically. But this is just a unit in the DCI, and that these are two units that are within the DCI that are primarily based in major cities, while people are coming from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, if we're speaking now Kenya. And so one of the challenges we're having, the knowledge that the people in these units have is very different from the person on the ground who, for instance, if a victim is to run and report this crime in a police station, would be able to help. And in cases where, for instance, where we saw in the previous, the last video before we took the break, there are people who are arrested in being in the country illegally. Well, either they could have been smuggled into the country or they are victims of human trafficking. So we find that even when it comes to now enforcing the law, one, there is a general lack of understanding of the and even awareness on the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act among law enforcement, and two, when it comes to the provisions of charging and sentencing to take these people into court, you'd find that other related crimes are actually used to prosecute these persons. So, for instance, if you're not in the country illegally, you're being charged with, let's say, whatever you are being found to be doing illegally. There are times victims find themselves, because we don't have shelters for victims of trafficking, for instance, we find that they're being put in let's say the police station for some time as the police try and figure out how to help these people. This is both for nationals, this is both for foreigners. So there's a lot more capacity building that needs to be done with law enforcement, primarily the ones who are on the ground and not within these specialized units of the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. And that's where us as NGOs come in, and civil society organizations, to build the capacity not only of the magistrates and the judges, but also of the law enforcement on the ground. So wherever the hotspots are, whether it's Western Kenya, Nairobi, Mombasa, the law enforcement in those areas need to have their capacities built to address that.
Julian, thank you. And now, talking about law enforcement, magistrates from different counties went through a 3-day training to increase their capacity to deal with human trafficking cases, especially those that involve electronic evidence. Now, in the meeting held in Nairobi, it was established that over 300,000 Kenyans are involved in illegal human trafficking, some of whom escape justice on the grounds of poor evidence collection or processing delays in the judicial process was also cited as one of the reasons why cases fail. The training looked at the different forms of human trafficking and the legal framework that can be used to take action on those that commit such crimes.
In terms of ensuring that these cases are prosecuted and concluded expeditiously as the Constitution requires.
Not everybody understands the nuances of human trafficking. That's why we're here, walking them through the definition, walking them through the statute, because it's not every day you see these cases. Some judges may not see them. But when we want a judge who, on the off chance that they see a trafficking case, they understand what it is. They're making sure that they're treating victims as victims and not as defendants.
Okay, and to you, Sophie, your thoughts on our law enforcement in tackling human trafficking?
I think this is one area that I'll actually commend the government. I think establishment of the Transnational Organized Crime Unit and the Anti-Human Trafficking Child Protection Unit have really, those two teams, personally, I think have done really, really commendable work in terms of the capacity that has been built. But as Julian has said, there's a huge gap because those units have very few people. And secondly, the purpose of law enforcement is to arrest and to investigate. As soon as even they rescue or they even do some of these raids, where do they take these victims? Where are they supposed to take them? And if we don't have a civil society that is ready to take in clients, or a government system that basically ensures that clients are identified and victims are identified and are protected, it becomes really difficult because they cannot do, the units can only do as much raids to the point, to a certain point. Because if you are going to court, and again, Julian is a lawyer, she'll tell you, survivors can be uncooperative, especially if they're not taken care of. If you arrest someone, or if you rescue, quote unquote, rescue someone, and then you put them in prison, or because essentially, honestly, you have nowhere else to put them. You put them in prison. They stay there for 3-4 days. Will that person be in a capacity to actually testify in court? Not necessarily. And I'm a huge advocate of the backstops with the government. I'm a huge advocate of that. So I say that regardless, even the trainings that we are doing, I honestly think that at the end of the day, NGOs should run themselves out of business and government should take over the responsibility of ensuring the safety of its citizens. So how that happens, it's really, there's a huge gap. So I'm hoping that essentially the knowledge, like for example, that the two units have will trickle down to the different police stations and victims will be identified more.
Oh, okay. Now, just briefly, Julian, how much should you push government for duty of care? I know the NGO occupies that space in helping government. Sophie is very clear it's government's responsibility. What are your thoughts?
We do have a duty, and in the past historical events, there are organizations like the Cradle that actually sued the government so that this entity that's within the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act, called the Advisory Committee, could actually be established and start actually implementing the act, because at the end of the day, the Advisory Committee is actually a committee made up of various intergovernmental organizations, from immigration, foreign affairs, Federation of Kenya Employers, COTU, just to name a few, including Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, that actually work. They're supposed to now ensure that counter-trafficking in persons in Kenya is happening smoothly. So there are and have always been pushes by civil society organizations to actually ensure that the government, one, for instance, sets up shelters, ensures that there is victim-centered approaches to how to help victims of trafficking, including what I talked about. There's a universal periodic review where Kenya as a whole was peer-reviewed by other states, and trafficking was amongst one of the many issues that came up. So
how well did we perform?
I can't comment on that at the moment,
okay.
But you can see me later for results.
All right, not for public. Yes. Okay, I can already guess what kind of report card we had for that. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back with our last segment of this discussion on human trafficking. But just before we go, here are some of your thoughts. Now, we asked you, have you experienced human trafficking or know of someone who's been sold to slavery? What happened and how can this practice be stopped? Here are your comments. First of all, Jose, you say people end up taking up jobs abroad, especially in the Middle East, because of poor governance and poor policies done by our governments and those in leadership positions. For example, since 2013, how many companies have actually died? Okay. So David Kipto, you say, well, human trafficking should be ended. I think it is the most wicked thing. Okay, Julian nods, she agrees with you. Kevin Moigai, you say, especially these jobs, the UAE, they are not good at all. Okay, what was the experience there? Olika Muyela, By revamping and instituting a total overhaul in the police service, there is no form of human trafficking that happens without the consent of the police. There is need for digital alertness by the police and other forms of counter restrictions. Thank you, Muela, for that. We'll be right back.
Wanasherehekea miaka 20 na wewe. Piga star 444 20 tumia shilingi 20 pekee utunukiwe 20 minutes na 20 MP.
Jerusalema ikayalami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana. Jerusalema ikayalami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana. Dawo yami ayikolana, buso wami awukolana. Ilondoloze zuhambe nami. Dawo yami ayikolana, buso wami awukolana. Ilondoloze dawo yami ayikolana, buso wami awukolana. Ilondoloze zuhambe nami. Dawo yami ayikolana, buso wami awukolana. Ilondoloze zuhambe nami. Jerusalema ikayalami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana. Jerusalema ikayalami ilondoloze uhambe nami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami
Every spoonful of Nutri comes loaded with the necessary vitamins, protein and minerals for you and your family to become healthier and stronger. Pick up a pack today from your nearest store.
Nutri, every spoonful counts.
Welcome back to Your World this Thursday morning. We are looking at human trafficking in Kenya and also beyond our borders. With me on the panel, Julian Duta, who's the National Project Manager for Love Justice International Kenya. We're also joined via Zoom by Sophie Otiende, a feminist, survivor, and a big advocate against the practice of human trafficking. And via Zoom from the UK, Peter Murimi, who is an award-winning producer, documentary producer and director who has a film out which is just produced, which we've been discussing in the last few minutes. And now let me turn to you, Sophie. Now a lot has happened during this COVID-19 season. What's been the impact of the pandemic, if any, on human trafficking?
I think in terms of anybody who's been in the field of trafficking for long enough will say that the pandemic has only highlighted some of the gaps that we were already seeing before the pandemic. So basically some of the things that we were seeing have now just become more visible. The fact that, let's say, for example, trafficking victims being identified outside the country and being able to access help to return home. The situation with the Lebanese women who are stuck and basically even had to hold a protest outside the Kenyan consulate to be able to be returned home, mainly by well-wishers, is just something that we've slowly been seeing during our time. The fact that now we see more and more cases that are moving to the digital space because people are staying at home more than they would, so everything is going back into the digital space. So we are seeing a lot of online trafficking. The fact that we clearly do not have shelters that are enough or are clearly not prepared to provide long-term support to survivors has been clear during the pandemic because we as survivors could not be able to access help because most of the shelters had to shut down or basically did not have enough funding to continue operating. Have there been significant changes? Yes, but it's mainly just highlighting all the gaps that have been there throughout. We need to have systems for identification of victims in destination countries like in the UAE so that people can be able to be identified and can be able to return home safely. People shouldn't have to protest outside their consulate so that their government actually listens to their pleas and brings them back home, especially considering what they've gone through. If you think about Peter's documentary and think about the situation, because I know working with the people that had been working it, I know that there are women that are still stuck in India as a result of the pandemic and cannot be able to come back. And as we say, the more they stay, the more debt they get into, and no one is going to basically help them cover that debt. So the pandemic has just highlighted the systemic gaps that were already there before this situation started.
Thank you, Sophie. Julian, any thoughts to add on the pandemic?
I will add that, of course, with the closed borders, there are more cases of harboring. We'd assume there are more cases of harboring. There are more cases of people who are actually crossing through borders illegally still happening. We had some cases that we identified in some of our projects where we know that that country's borders are closed, but we are getting their people here. There are also people who are still recruiting, still recruiting people for jobs abroad, yet we know for a while our international borders had not yet been opened up. So some of them have been highlighted, like Sophia said, but there are some that we make assumptions, knowing the way these criminal enterprises work, that there are a number of things that definitely were not being highlighted, and so we would assume that still a number of people are still being processed through those organizations. The other thing is, as she said, rescues and shelters. Efforts of law enforcement, for instance, have been put in different areas. And so one of the things that has happened is, even where do we place these people in shelters? With COVID-19, a number of measures need to be there. We saw prisons, people can't go and visit there. So even admission of people into shelters, for instance, it was already difficult. Now you can imagine the situation now with COVID-19, and it's not like even the tests are the most affordable for everyone.
Okay. To you, Murimi, I wonder, were you making this film during the pandemic or did you do it earlier?
No, this film came out last year. Right. It's just showing at the Human Rights Watch Festival now, but it came out last year. So this is not during the pandemic at all. Even at that time, COVID never existed. It was a foreign concept. But just to say, I think, to me, the pandemic, what I think is doing is, especially if you've been trafficked, it closes options of you leaving that horrible situation. And I think that's a really big disadvantage of the pandemic. It just completely closes up all the options of escape.
Now, you have a history of making gritty films, Slum Survivors and, your earlier one on FGM. How does this India project compare to what else you've tackled as a subject for filming?
I guess it's very difficult to have a hierarchy, but because I think every issue is as important as the next. The thing is, and what I should not forget, and I hope everyone should not forget, because I try to give voice to the voiceless. Those are the topics that attract me, people that normally will be overlooked by the society. So this project is really special in a sense because we managed to tell this story, especially with Nyasha, the director, like in Grace's own voice, and her input and how she sees the world was very alive in the film. And that was really important for us, because sometimes it's very easy for us to editorialize the narrative. But for this particular project, Grace's voice is very prominent and with us throughout, and that's very special. I like that about this project.
Okay. Now, Julian, I know we talked about law enforcement and stuff like that. So what are the gaps, what are the quick wins in fighting human trafficking?
I'd focus on partnership, just one word. In the counter-trafficking in person space, we talk about the 4 Ps, but different organizations add an extra Ps. So we talk about partnership, we talk about prosecution, we talk about prevention, and we talk about forgot the last one. We talk about what Sophie does. That's ensuring that people are well taken care of. So one of the things that I can say have been gains is just sharing intel amongst each other. There are different organizations that are strong on different aspects. For instance, I can talk of Love Justice. We are strong when it comes to prevention. When it comes to Heart Kenya and like what Sophie does, that's providing support services to victims. There are those that are good at prosecution because they have a legal team, and then they can also work closer with law enforcement. So what we have is, even during this period of COVID, because our operations had been affected, we actually gained a lot of intel and focused more on internal trafficking that did not stop. So different people, and if you've studied migration, you're seeing more people moving from the urban areas back into the rural areas, and that will come with its own kinds of complexity. So just sharing and managing trends and following the trends as they go along would help us a long way. Instead of responding to the issue, we prevent it.
Okay, yeah. Sophie, let's talk about rescue. When someone has been rescued from these kind of situations of human trafficking, what do they go through? What are the processes? What kind of help? You know, how does it work?
Right now, I think, again, I go back to the system being standardized. Right now, you don't know, as a survivor, it depends on who rescues you, quote unquote, at the end of the day. If you are lucky, let's say, for example, you get rescued by someone who's aware of what trafficking is, what they'll do is that they'll refer you to an organization that works on trafficking. The organization will screen you and then essentially look at your needs and basically support you. But that looks different for each survivor, depending on who identifies you. For example, if a survivor is identified by law enforcement, at a point where they've been identified maybe as criminals and law enforcement do not have the capacity maybe to identify that survivor as a survivor, what that survivor will end up going through is that they'll end up arrested or they'll end up in jail. So the experience is different for everyone. And that's why when I go back and say that we need to have a conversations about systems and standards and making the process the same for every single person, Kenya has a national referral mechanism that needs to be implemented. It needs to be put in a system where, as a survivor of trafficking, if I'm caught anywhere, I know this is the number that I will call, and I know that I will get assistance, regardless of where I am in the world. There should be a system that is clear and that can say step 1, step 2, step 3, this is what happens. Right now, I can't tell you that survivors go through multiple experiences depending on who rescues them. If you're lucky, you get Julian and Love Justice, identify you on a bus station, she will refer you to an organization, they'll make sure you are safe. If you find somebody else, when I was working at Heart, we actually had a story of someone, a survivor who actually went to get help somewhere and ended up being abused by that person while they were seeking help. So the experience is very different depending on the person that ends up rescuing you.
Thank you, Sophie. Now to you, Julian. So when someone is in distress, or if you suspect that there is human trafficking going on, where does one turn to for help?
So
practically, yeah.
So practically, I'll talk from my organization's experience. Because we're at the bus station and people are already on the move, we have first responders who are there. We have a police post and we have actual police stations. So we do work with the police. We also work with the bus management companies to help us repatriate people before they are actually exploited. In the case where, for instance, some people have already gone through some forms of exploitation, we do report to the police. We do try and get them safe shelter, and we also do try and get them medical support in the cases where they needed to. In fact, all this information essentially should go through all the way to the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Secretariat. So the issue with also responding has been the fact that our data is scattered, so we don't know the magnitude of the problem. And so because the data, for instance, is scattered, and the fact that, like Sophie said, our national referral mechanism is not being implemented implemented the way it's supposed to be, different people respond differently and have different responses in priority. But for instance, for our organization, that's what we would do.
Okay. Now, a Kenyan woman who died in Saudi Arabia in June was buried at her home in Elbagon, Nakuru County. Alice Awor had traveled to Saudi Arabia in January to work as a house girl but died in June this year. Her parents say Alice informed them in March that she was being mistreated by her employer, and shortly after, their communication was cut off. The mother of two was the sole breadwinner for her family. Speaking during her burial, local residents called on the government to create jobs for the youth in order to keep them in the country. Okay, and a story that we alluded to earlier. A club owner in Mombasa and 12 Nepalese women were arrested in 2019 in an operation targeting an international sex trafficking syndicate. Police say the Nepalese citizens, believed to be strippers, were in Kenya illegally. At the time, Rose Wangoi reported on the dynamics around the arrest of the women and the club owner who was in possession of a Canadian passport.
In a dawn operation, detectives from the Transnational Organized Crime Unit raided the Rangila Grill and Bar in Nyali and arrested the owner, Asif Jetha Amirali, alongside 12 women from Nepal who are suspected to have been employed as strippers. The women were entertaining revelers at the club when the raid happened.
Acting on a tip-off from members of the public, we raided a club in Nyali. We believe they are victims of human trafficking.
Police discovered they sneaked into the country through Lunga border, but their successful entry into the country is still a mystery. The club owner, Jetha, says the women had temporary passes. As such, was conducted at the club and money, mobile phones and documents were recovered. Jetha was found in possession of a Canadian passport, but police say that is not his nationality. The Coast Region Deputy Police Commandant says they're investigating how he acquired the passport.
Our investigation will reveal if it's a Kenyan or Canadian passport, or is a dual citizen person. That is yet to be known later after investigations.
The police are following a lead that would likely see more suspects arrested in the drive to end sex trafficking, which is human trafficking for purposes of sexual exploitation.
Let me warn them, whoever is doing that kind of job in Mombasa, he has no room. He has no room because the operation will continue. And it will never end soon. Until we ensure Kabisa, there is nothing like human trafficking or biancals in Mombasa.
Sex trafficking includes sexually slavery, where a victim is forced in a variety of ways into dependency on the trafficker and giving sexual services to customers, especially in bars and brothels. The suspect and the immigrants will remain at the Nyali police station until when they will be arraigned in court.
Now, Julian, a lot of us, when we think about human trafficking, we think of it outbound, people living in Kenya going up, but this is now the reverse of that, the Nepalese incident.
Yes. As I had alluded to, Kenya finds itself in a very unique and strategic position where we are both a source country, so people are coming from Kenya, are recruited all the way from Kenya to different countries. We find that people are coming through Kenya, through our international airport that has planes going to different destinations in the world, into different countries, as I said. And then we find ourselves being the destination country, like in the case of the Nepalese ladies, where different people with different objectives recruit people from out of the country to come and work in an exploitative situation in Kenya. And probably our laws and, as I said, our borders, there are parts that we have gaps that need to be filled, so such kind of cases do not ideally happen.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. Now, in July, Kenya joined other nations in marking the World Against Human Trafficking Day. The theme focused this year on the first responders, such as social workers, labor inspectors, law enforcement officers, and others who help victims find justice and help rebuild their lives. A shocking 25 million people are trafficked globally, and Kenya has unfortunately been found to be, as Julian says, a source of human trafficking as well as a transit point.
Here in Kenya, the most prevalent internal trafficking in person involved children trafficking from rural areas to urban areas for exploitation as domestic workers. From July 2019 to date, 612 cases of child labor have been reported to the Child Protection Information Management System.
To make the war against trafficking in person a success, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution has also put in place several measures, which includes the establishment of a specialized unit within the Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Division, increased the presence of prosecutors in all regions of the country, developed a TIP or Trafficking in Persons Manual, trained and sensitized prosecutors, investigators, and other stakeholders.
Okay, now, Sophie, this idea of Kenya being right in the middle of this human trafficking, where both a source, a transit point, and a destination, it must make it really difficult to bring the practice to an end.
Yeah, it is, but for me, I always say for any issue, there has to be a political will, and there has to be, there has to be a political, not just a political will, but also a cultural will. So the political will is the systems, whatever we put in place. As Julian has said, if the issue of trafficking is also just not a Kenyan issue, it's a global issue, and that's the other thing, is that trafficking is a global issue. We don't just see it happening in Kenya, we see it happening globally. So we also need to think about culturally as human beings, what are we doing to ensure that we are not exploiting people, because that's what trafficking is. It's exploiting people. And that's why, for me, it's extremely important for us to go back to systems, to go back to cultures, and ask ourselves, what do we need to do to actually, because trafficking, for me, trafficking is a symptom of a much bigger problem. Trafficking is a symptom of a bigger problem of inequality. It's a much bigger problem of, it's a human rights issue. So if we focus on the issue itself and don't look at the root causes and the systems that actually allow people to be trafficked, we are constantly going to be talking about the same conversation. So we have many of the women that, for example, the women that go to Saudi Arabia or basically go to the Middle East. If we had, as that clip, as they said, if we had opportunities in Kenya, many people would not risk their lives to actually go and get abused in a system that clearly does not value them. So by us focusing on people going to the Middle East and really not focusing on inequality and not focusing on the lack of education and not focusing on the fact that it's more women that are being trafficked than men and children, we are really also closing our eyes to what the real issue is. So for me, also looking at what the root causes are and addressing them would be the most effective way to eradicate it.
Okay, Sophie. Now, Murimi, I wonder whether your film offers any solutions. How do you begin tackling this kind of syndicate, this kind of multi-million, perhaps even multi-billion shilling industry? Where do you start from?
Oh, God. Because it's complex, it's big, and as Sophie said, the problem is also because of lack of opportunities at home or anywhere. Like, it's very easy to recruit people to be human trafficked. So I think what the film does, and the biggest motivation for making the film, was public awareness. We're just hoping, like, next time you can tell the language that they use or the circumstances that you are told will happen to you. So I think this film is not about breaking down the trafficking ring, but this film is about stopping potential future people from being trafficked. That's the biggest point of this film.
And from Grace's point of view, who is a driver of this narrative, I wonder whether she regrets. Does she see any point in her life looking back where she could have stopped? You know, obviously she went there with a promise of one thing. It turned out something else. Was there any exit points prior to that at all for her?
You know, hindsight, you're wiser, but the point is, when you're in it, you are in a situation and you make a decision. She made the right decision at the time that she thought. But yes, with hindsight, all of us, like when you have the benefit of looking back, yes, it's true, could have done something different. But I think at the time, even if I was her, I would have taken the exact same choices because of the desperation.
And it's right to say that there are other graces left behind.
Yes, sadly, there are.
Okay, so as we come to our last few minutes, let me just get your closing thoughts, maybe starting with you, Sophie. What are your thoughts in terms of, well, tackling this problem? It's been with us since the beginning of time, slavery, really. But how do you begin tackling it here in Kenya?
So it's what I've been saying consistently on this. Systems. We need to have better systems that protect people. We need to address the issue of inequality, whether that's gender inequality or whatever, all the issues that actually make people vulnerable. We need to address our system, this whole idea of money being the end all, so that, people don't even value people's lives, essentially because at the end of the day you are paying them, needs to stop. So we need to be better human beings. And by that, we also need a government that reflects our values. We need to value ourselves and also hold the government accountable to value us, value our lives, and put systems in place that protect us consistently. In prevention, I would say looking at the whole social protection system in Kenya, universal health care, ensuring that people can be able, because some people travel simply because someone fell sick and then they got into debt and now they have to address it. So looking at the social protection system, which would include education, would include addressing people that are vulnerable so that people, when they're recruited, people have options. Peter has mentioned here, the consistent thing has been that people do not have options. Whose responsibility is it to create a world that actually offers options for all of us? That's the only way trafficking will end.
Okay, Sophie, thank you. And to you, Murimi, finally, how do people get to see the film?
So the film, it's showing at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival. You could watch it online. But also, it's on the BBC platform. If you go on YouTube, you can watch it on BBC. It's called Imported for My Body.
And I believe later tonight you're doing a question and answer session.
Yes. And if anyone can join us, that would be amazing. Nyasha, the director, will be there, and a fantastic panel from the Human Rights Watch. So that would be really informative and exciting, and really looking forward to it.
Oh, okay. And to you, Julian, your final closing thought?
I would emphasize on partnership focused on information sharing amongst all of us, stakeholders, both government and non-government organizations. Also focus on reporting, emphasis on reporting. The more we report, the more information we have and the more we are able to address this. Even as we report, we need to collect data and centralize it, and this data will then be used to have evidence-based policies. The numbers that you've talked about, the 20 million people, those are just estimates. Actually, we don't have actual numbers, and so if globally we can actually have numbers, that would go a long way in addressing the issue. And my last point is focus on safe migration advice. It is your legal right to move from point A to point B, but you need to be able to do it safely. We need to focus on providing safe migration advice.
Okay, thank you so much, Julian Duta, who's the National Project Manager, Love Justice International Kenya. We also were on this panel had Sophie Otiende, a feminist survivor and a big advocate of eradicating human trafficking. And via Zoom from London, we were joined by Peter Murimi, award-winning documentary producer and director. Catch up with his conversation as he and the director of that film answer your questions, and also you can follow up the actual film online and also on the Human Rights Film Festival that's coming up. Now, tomorrow, my two left feet, and I think I've got about 4, and I learn how to dance the latest dance styles, as well as Latin-influenced dances such as salsa, which is just one style. I can't wait, or rather, gosh, I don't know how I'm going to get through that. That's tomorrow. starting from 7 a.m. Before then, as always, and just to keep those feet in good shape, we'll have our workout session with our experienced trainers who will be taking you through the paces from the comfort of their homes and your own home. That's the discussion tomorrow. Thank you so much to my panel and to you for watching us and staying tuned to NTV Your World, and to my NTV colleagues, crew and the production team. Thank you so much. Stay safe and have a good day.